Is the food we're eating killing us? Hi, I'm Dr. Eric Westman, and welcome to my channel where I review and debunk nutritional misinformation online. This video is a show, Dr. Phil, where he's interviewing several people about highly processed foods. One says it's all bad, and another says Diet Coke basically saved him. Who's right? Be sure to wait till the end where I give my final thoughts. Before we dive into today's video, I want to invite you to my free webinar, Beyond Cholesterol, the 2 biggest risk factors for cardiovascular disease. If you're confused by cholesterol or feeling pressured by your doctor to take cholesterol medication, this webinar is perfect for you. Discover the crucial facts about why cholesterol isn't the primary concern for cardiovascular disease risk, and learn what you should focus on instead to evaluate and lower your risk. You can sign up below. Well, so this is an interview that Dr. Phil did, but I think it's a good one to watch. And I don't agree with everything Dr. Phil says and does, but the interviewees here have some important things to say. And of course, if you've watched my channel for a while, I've talked about how food is important to think about and how in our lifetime, the last few decades, we've been basically taught, even in the medical schools, that food doesn't really matter. There are very few nutrition classes that doctors get, for example. And so it's almost as if doctors and medical schools are saying what you put in your body doesn't matter, as a treatment even, or as a prevention. And I don't agree with that at all. And I think there's some really important points here.
Coca-Cola pays the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Diabetes Association, the American Cancer Society. We did that in spades, millions of dollars to groups that would do that for us. So just went down the list of institutions Americans trust and tried to get them money. That was my job. Humans are born with an innate sense of what's good for us, and that is being taken away by the food industry.
Wow. Well, I've heard Callie Means talk once before on a different interview, and he has lots of really important points that I agree with. That the idea of this ultra-processed food and how we get into defining that's going to be one of the nuances in a minute I don't agree with, but how food is the cause of chronic diseases, absolutely. And you wouldn't really know that until you took them all away, took all the bad food away. I've been able to experience that in my training and in my clinic at Duke, where I use lifestyle change, and there are a lot of ways to be healthy. I teach people the keto or low-carb or however you want to call it, a healthy, real food-based diet that does include animal products. Some people think that that's the answer. I don't think that's the only answer. So, but the food that we eat really matters, and the idea of sugar addiction, not just ultra-processed food. I kind of like the term sugar addiction because ultra-processed food will include things that I think are fine. Wait for that in just a minute. So in the program that I teach, I do include some Callie would call it, I think his sister's a doctor. He's not a doctor, but he's a whistleblower coming out from industry saying, hey, people, you're basically being purchased and you're being profited on, and the industry is purchasing researchers and the airwaves, media. And, I kind of resist getting into this area and really want to stick into a clinic. But I have to agree, it even got into my area of obesity research, where a very prominent obesity researcher who would only talk about exercise. So it was fascinating. He would give a talk on obesity, and he would only talk about exercise. And I'm a diet and lifestyle expert, so I would say, well, but what about, but the time's up, he only talks about exercise. Well, it turns out that this researcher had been funded by Coca-Cola to only study exercise. And so this is a tactic where if you fund people to study something else, you're taking away, the limited resources we have to study things from studying your products. So Coca-Cola, it's brilliant. I mean, tobacco did this too. And as you'll hear, a lot of the tobacco intellect went into food companies as they were purchased. And I don't know if they're unwittingly creating these problems they don't know, or they've been shielded themselves or given real food. I've been a doctor of people who worked for the tobacco companies, and they gave them free cigarettes. Still do. So if the sugar industry gives people free food and free sugar, well, maybe the scientists don't realize that they're in on something that's really, as you'll see, devious and unhealthy. So when Jim Hill in Colorado got kind of called on the carpet for taking Coca-Cola money and studying exercise, it got into my sphere, and that was real. He got in some hot water for that, and it's a tactic to buy off researchers, no question.
The key thing that the food companies know is that ultra-processed food, which is now up to 70% of our diet, is a science experiment. They're hijacking our evolutionary biology, and they're making the food addictive.
Yeah, so there was another whistleblower who came out of industry, wrote a book called Salt, Sugar, Fat. Michael Moss, I think his name is, and basically told the story of scientists manipulating the three major variables so that every time there was a focus group, you would know you'd change one of these things and people would be unable to resist eating them. And, that basically is showing that your product is so great that you can't stop eating. Remember back in the day that Lay's potato chips advertised, bet you can't eat just one? I don't think they advertise that anymore. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't watch a lot of TV, but so it would be on the edge of, wait a second, maybe this is addictive if you use that kind of language. Although, so Doritos and Cheetos, I don't mean to call out one brand, but all of these are made with science to make it so that you can't, the general public, the average person can't stop eating them, and they'll want to buy more, which means more sales and more profit without regard to any indication about health. I'm not aware of any sort of federal guideline that says if you're producing a food, you have to show that it's healthy for people. I mean, you might go to expert opinion, but a company is not required to show that their new ranch flavored whatever product is healthy for people. And, how would you vet that anyway? That's a matter of opinion, although it should have some nutrition in it, I would argue, I would hope. But so this is really fascinating, and it's great that he's written a book about this where you can actually get information about it.
When you do a brain scan of a person eating ultra-processed food, it fits all the criteria for addiction, and we've gotten people addicted.
Absolutely, I agree. And it doesn't apply to everybody, but there are many, many people who are addicted and can't get off these foods. It would be, going back to the 1970s, so early in my lifetime when everyone was smoking. Do you remember that time? Everyone's smoking and doctors are saying, well, my favorite cigarette is this one and it's good for you. It helps me breathe better. And so then it was found out how bad it was, the emphysema, the lung cancer, the asthma, and just plain it was smelly. I wish the food smelled bad. The Cinnabon smell that's being put into the air so that you'll want to go get a Cinnabon. The smoking, at least in the transition and the amount of people smoking has gone way down compared to when I was younger. But a part of that is that it just smells bad, and you can kind of say get away that where the most bread and pasta, rice, and Cinnabons, honey buns, these things smell good, which is just a different sort of situation.
I was shocked as a junior employee to see a list of names of professors from Harvard, from Tufts Nutrition School, from Stanford. And as a junior employee working for the food companies as a consultant, I steered money to those schools. The food industry funds nutrition research in this country 11 times more than the NIH.
Now, the language here, I don't know the legalities of it. Is it illegal to bribe somebody? I think so. If it's under the table, if it's you're supporting some illegal activity, you might think of that as a bribe. But this is in plain sight. So the researchers are wittingly or unwittingly studying something with money from companies. So it might not technically be an illegal bribe, but you can see it certainly is influential if you can support someone to study something other than your product, that's a way to influence, if it's not a bribe.
Okay, so you say added sugar for 2-year-olds. So these cereals that they might eat that have all the cartoons on the front of them and that sort of thing, you're talking about the same mantra for a drug dealer.
The biggest drug addiction crisis and drug issue in the country by far is the ultra-processed food industry.
Interesting. Hear the language. Why didn't he say sugar? Sugar, I think, is an important thing to call out, and it may be because it's very powerful, and choosing ultra-processed food might be a way around to make it a little smoother, pun intended, for people to swallow, because he's certainly trying to make a political statement here. So the idea that taking away that bad food, the junk food, as we were taught, really is powerful, I have to admit. So actually, I can't prove in a randomized trial going forward that giving someone these foods compared to another group that didn't have it, you get these diseases. Those studies don't exist because, remember, the companies are studying other things. But I can attest and show that in our research that if you take away that food, things get better. So when you think of a diet program, there's no healthy, effective diet program that allows for all of these kinds of sugar and ultra-processed foods. So we're really taking that away from people when we're teaching a new diet. Of course, the question comes in is how much of it you have to take away. In my experience and in my clinic, I take away all of it and just say, hey, wait a minute, let your body calm down, let the blood sugars come down, let the weight come down. Pretty much every chronic disease gets better, like he's saying. I know it sounds unreal and unbelievable, but the studies that are prospective randomized trials showing that these are the cause don't exist. But to say that you can take them away and things get better, certainly that research exists. And there are many different ways to take away the junk food and to be healing the body and getting rid of the chronic diseases. As a physician who got an internal medicine and obesity medicine, now keto medicine physician in a clinic, I see people after the diseases have already started, have already progressed, and I can reverse them and prevent them from coming back. But there's an idea called upstream medicine, or it's called preventive medicine. And like he's saying, the problem starts way before people hit my clinic. And I want to switch more into a preventive sort of advocacy. I'm getting involved with organizations that will be trying to stop that beginning. The metaphor is people jump into this river of sugar and ultra-processed food, and they get taken downstream, and then we take people out of the river and save lives when we change the food, simply changing the food. So why don't we go upstream and stop people from jumping in the river? Well, that means hitting the women who are pregnant, telling them how to eat correctly, getting rid of these junk foods. This is getting to the schools, taking away these really really archaic, unscientific guidelines for what children should eat. It's really kind of crazy. In fact, I don't know that a guideline is really helpful in schools or in other institutions because it's caused so much harm because the wrong guideline was chosen, or at least there should be flexibility in these guidelines. So I really wanted to spend some time on this idea of preventing all of these problems, because when you wait until someone comes to my clinic, you're not really addressing it early enough to prevent the diseases that have already occurred.
You're saying Coca-Cola went and paid the NAACP to call anybody racist that was resisting the sugar tax.
Anyone who questioned the idea of taking food stamp funding away from Coke racist, saying that lower income kids, really enjoyed their soda.
Yeah, so having a child having their soda is a personal choice issue. Well, let's just have them smoke cigarettes, right? Fascinating how there can be such a blind spot when there's addiction involved. And it reminds me of an encounter in my clinic recently where someone comes in and they're basically blaming themselves for the problem. Obesity, diabetes, all that. I know I don't have any willpower. I'm not worthy. This kind of no. So I build up often someone to say, no, food is the problem. It is the food that you can't resist. But, don't take my word for it. Here's a plan. Here's a program. Here's just a sheet list of foods. Not of it is sugar or ultra processed. It's basically an allowed food list that's low carb, and it doesn't have any of these addictive things on it. And I said, just try it for a day and see what happens. And almost miraculously, the cravings go away, the hunger goes away. There's this willpower that people feel. Well, it's not really willpower. It's not you want something and you resist it. It's just you're not hungry because you're burning fat so well. So the idea of allowing this to be normalized and then people are blaming themselves for it is it's really sad, because it's a food problem. It's not someone's inability to have willpower and resist. And it reminds me of going back to when, just about everyone was smoking. There's nothing wrong with this. And, well, I can't really quit it. But that, if I only had willpower. Well, I worked for 10 years helping develop treatments for smoking cessation, nicotine replacement and Chantix and Wellbutrin, which turned into Zyban and all these medications that helped people get over that addictive pull. Same thing is applying here to sugar for many people. And if you hook children on sugar, what are they going to do other than have sugar? And then now pediatric programs have diabetes clinics, type 2 diabetes clinics that related to overweight and obesity. These didn't exist when I was in training. Fatty liver in children didn't exist 20, 30 years ago when I was a younger doctor. And so these are a direct result of the food that people have been eating. And whether they have a choice or not, there's addiction. Yeah, some people are addicted. They are not in control. And the way to stop it is like cold turkey for cigarette smoking. You just give it all up on one day. It actually makes it easier if you give it all up on one day.
And Diet Coke is a huge part of my life. I consume, give or take, a gallon of Diet Coke a day. The reality is there is virtually zero evidence that diet soda of any kind can cause harm to you, and the benefits on its usefulness outweigh by far any of the risks.
So this is very interesting. So how do you define ultra-processed food? And if you're going after industry, you're going to kind of want to get it, everything that industry does is bad. Well, this fellow has so much Diet Coke, and it's helped him lose weight, and he's having all of this throughout the day. That is what you would call an ultra-processed food. And yet, in my clinic, I'll allow people to have sugar-free things like Diet Coke, and they get better, meaning metabolically. So are we tied to, criticizing an industry for being bad, or are we going to be following what the food or drinks does to the human body? I think that's the more important thing. So if something can be processed and yet it doesn't affect the human body in a bad way, this could be a potential solution where companies are involved in the answer. A lot of people get uncomfortable when I say, I had a young man eating at McDonald's and he lost 100 pounds. He just didn't eat the carbs at McDonald's. He had double cheeseburgers, no bun, no fries, no sugar in the drinks, and he was happy with his same meal every day, which some people are. But so many people say, well, fast food is evil, throw out the baby out with it. No. So I've learned to work and meet people where they live and what they can afford and things that they like. And actually, I'm almost going to maybe, unless there's science presented, side with this fellow that Diet Coke is fine. Let's see.
And you think this is good for you?
Actually, yes. I was formerly overweight. I was 5'5", 170 pounds when I was younger. I was around 14, 15. They have a study here where 18.65% more people in a group that substituted diet soda for water lost at least 5% of their body weight.
Well, so it does seem kind of shocking, right, to have someone drinking that much. Now, I don't know how many people in my clinic are drinking that much Diet Coke, but certainly I'll say having some servings instead of Coca-Cola or Pepsi or any other sugar-sweetened beverage, I don't care what brand it is going to be healthier when you're trying to get off of sugar and an addictive substance. When you're trying to lose weight, these are non-caloric drinks, so they don't make you gain weight. And even in a context of a low-carb diet, you're not going back to sugar. So there are some studies that suggest that the more sugar free drinks that you have, the more sugar you'll eat. Well, this is not an option. I mean, on a low-carb diet, you don't go back to that sugar. So the sugar-free, the use of these non-sugar sweeteners, I think, are really important to meet people who are really addicted to sugar and starch, and you give them an alternative. Whether a gallon a day is healthy or not, I'm not sure. I wonder if it's been studied.
Two high-level points, I think, that are really important about this for, I think, the audience to understand. Number one is I looked at that study, and on the study, it's funded by Coca-Cola.
Well, but so just because a company funds a study doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. I mean, let's say other diet substances are found, or a company sells water and bottles it and makes money off it. Is drinking water from a bottle bad? I mean, I guess you could talk about the plastics and all, but I don't think that's really clinically relevant. But so I do remember a patient who said, who would have dreamed that they'd be selling water in a bottle 50 years ago and making it a company? But so just to say that it's funded by a company is a little intellectually dishonest, because you do have to look at the paper and see what, and assume that if there's replication of it, that they didn't manipulate the data internally, which of course happens sometimes.
There's a ton of studies, nonpartisan, non-conflicted studies, that say that sweetness, that aspartame in Diet Coke, it's not risk-free. It hijacks our insulin levels. It hijacks our glucose level.
Yeah, so no, not all the time. So in the context of a low-carb diet where you're getting rid of all the other sugars and starches, these sweeteners do not cause insulin resistance, or if they do, they don't cause it very much, because we reverse insulin resistance. So it may be dose dependent. It may be that in the context of eating carbohydrates, you find that these have that effect. But I'm still waiting for a pure low-carb context study where you give someone aspartame or sucralose or some sweetener to see if the insulin goes up. I haven't seen it. I haven't seen the study, haven't seen it in my practice. It's kind of an urban legend out there. In some books that have published about this, it was taken out of context. Those artificial sweeteners were not raising insulin in a sugar and starch-free diet situation. They were in the context of a carb-containing diet. It doesn't make sense physiologically to me. It doesn't work against people clinically in the context of a low-carb diet. So I don't agree that these other non-sugar sweeteners influence insulin. I haven't seen it.
Thing risk-free, and we've been sold a bill of lies that these artificial sweeteners are not, without their problems.
Ooh, so, okay, let's throw away the bathwater, the baby with the bathwater here. No, so yes, everything is risk. Nothing is risk-free. And I'm afraid, perhaps for political theater, for shock value, that he's going a little too far here, in going beyond what the science says about human physiology. So I got to just call that where it is. In general, I like the position that most of the things coming out of industry are problematic, but not everything.
Yeah, because we were looking at these studies that you gave us.
Yes.
And there's a long list of people that fund and support those studies. General Mills, Kellogg, PepsiCo, they are funded, as you say, by the people that are selling you what they're testing.
Well, this reminds me, back in the day, I had two patients who lost weight in my VA ambulatory care clinic in Durham, North Carolina. I was curious. The only people who really knew about these diets were the diet book authors. And so I tracked down several of the book authors, went to the clinics, several of the doctors, and wrote a paper based on money that came from Dr. Atkins, his personal checking account. I went up and presented a paper protocol and went back down to the VA in Durham and Duke and did the study. When we're submitting this for publication, one of the comments was by a reviewer. It was that we're not used to seeing studies funded by doctors themselves. And so back in the day, you read it. So a doctor funded an independent researcher to study the diet that he promoted and made money from, the diet book and supplements and all that. And it was rejected by a high-level papers. I think this was JAMA. I'm pretty sure it was JAMA. So reviewers said basically, we can't, one of the reasons we can't publish it is that it was funded by the diet doctor himself. So, Dr. Ornish, Dean Ornish, didn't get in trouble for publishing a paper in JAMA, even though it was his diet that he was studying. Interesting difference there. But so I agree that you have to be suspicious and suspect. Now, in the hindsight, 20 years later, the low-carb diet that Dr. Atkins promoted and that other diet book authors, South Beach Diet, remember Sugar Busters and Protein Power, these were all low-carb diet books. Now, the studies have been done all over the world, randomized trials of low-carb diets versus other diets, including low-fat diets as the main one. And those findings were found over and over and over. Meta-analyses are done of randomized trials looking at that. So initially, having a study funded by the doctor who wrote the book could be suspicious. And, I advise other researchers to get someone else to study what you're doing if you can, or at least to replicate what you've done, because everyone is going to be suspicious about but it doesn't mean that the data are wrong. You want to make sure there's replication and that the headlines really reflect what the study says. That we see that all the time, where the headlines overblow or even say the wrong thing about what the study showed itself. But again, yes, you consider the source of funding, but you always want to look at the methodology and then whether the study has been replicated, ideally over and over and over.
Ultimately, reducing obesity, reducing your calorie intake is so important. And that's what diet soda has allowed me to do personally and allows some other people to do as well.
So he has a good point in where the studies that show these diet sodas cause significant problems. The things we've seen so far are, people will eat more or they'll want some sugar. Where's the study that shows in humans that these artificial sweeteners cause cancer or create other problems? I do know in the media over the last year now, there have been 2 studies highlighted that artificial sweeteners cause heart disease. And I've debunked those studies online in this channel because they really don't say that in their methodology. And best I can tell, it's a group who are trying to take pot shots against the artificial sweeteners, and you have to wonder if the sugar industry is somehow in this. So the sugar industry is different than the soda industry, right? So if sugar makes sugar, they don't make diet soda, right? If you sell sugar. So we have to consider different types of industry here. And we need industry. We need companies to make things for us. I only have a handful of friends who have chickens in their backyards, and we're not set up as a society to have our own eggs every day like that. But so I again, don't like the kind of extreme here, and there could be a solution somewhere in the middle. The healthcare industry makes money off you being sick, not being healthy. The prevention is not really part of our health industry, although there was, I think, great hope with the idea of HMOs. There was great hope with the idea of HMOs being preventive health organizations, but then when it comes to nutrition, people often lose their minds and become very unscientific very quickly. So it's a problem that the healthcare industry is not calling this out, but they make the money off disease. And so it really is incumbent upon us to learn, to share this information with each other, with our family. This has always been a grassroots kind of change for nutrition change and for changing healthcare, because the health industry in some ways wants you to be sick so they can profit off that. The doctors I know don't think that that's what's happening, but we're part of that whole kind of following the herd mentality. And so I have to agree with a lot of what Callie says. Not everything. I don't think everything the industry does is potentially bad. Let's focus on what happens in the human body. Should you have a gallon of Diet Coke every day or diet sodas? Maybe you could moderate that a little bit. I don't know. Maybe he's doing this out of an addictive element to the Diet Coke and needs to work on that. Is water the best thing to drink? Yeah, probably. And yet we've been a culture to drink sweet things. And I've switched to a lot of these kind of carbonated, sweet beverages that seem not to have any effect on the blood glucose and the insulin. And that's the main thing that I think is kind of missing here, is let's focus on what is metabolically sensible. And just stay away from lots of sugar. Starches get digested to sugar. If you want to call it ultra-processed food, be sure you say sugar and ultra-processed food in there. And somewhere in here, don't stress about having some artificial sweeteners. I don't really believe they're as bad as, and I think it's throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Hope that's helpful. Be sure to like, subscribe, ring the notification bell, and we're putting out new information on Wednesdays and Fridays. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, and check out adapterlifeacademy.com.